We seek the truth.
Would you be handing your resignation to the Minister of Culture tomorrow, sir?
No, I will not.
The leader of the opposition, you have accused your government, sir, of using the Grenada Development Bank to facilitate the financing of personal loans for certain government ministers.
The other side is in no position to talk about those issues, and I will leave it there.
We discover new perspectives.
You know his leadership style. And so many are saying, why are you coming now to talk about those issues?
Now is the time to speak. You have the right to decide who will take over.
And you met with Dr. Mitchell, and perhaps you might want to confirm what that meeting was about in your response. But
Dr. Mitchell, like myself, are Grenadians.
We ask the right questions.
why was there no report on the work done of the commission? And how is this new committee different from the commission that was initially established back in 2022? So who are these elements that are using you?
I'm disappointed in my political leader.
And why is that animating those political conversations now?
It's a very interesting question.
The Bubb Report with Dr. Kellon Bubb. Thought-provoking, truthful, unbiased, and truly original reporting.
Okay, audience, I'm back. There appears to have been an audio issue. I hope this issue is solved. So those of you in the green room who messaged me, can you hear me? I just want to make sure that you can hear me now. Before we proceed, I have no way of monitoring while it's live, my audio. It's it's a small operation we run here, but can you hear me now? Okay, very well. Our viewers are saying that they can hear us now. So that is the challenge of working sometimes as a one-man band. But back to the editorial of the week. And that has to do with the tipping point of global warming. Now, global carbon emissions are continuing to increase. Last year, they reached a staggering 40.6 billion tons, a record that is expected to be broken by the end of 2024. Now, atmospheric carbon levels are now more than 50% higher than they were in pre-industrial times, which results in the 1.5 degree temperature rise we're seeing globally. Unfortunately, the world's response to this disturbing worsening of atmospheric temperatures has been painfully slow. At last year's COP28 summit in Dubai, it was agreed to transition away from fossil fuels. Remarkably, this was the first time an international commitment to tackle explicitly the root cause of our climate crisis has been agreed to. In other words, it has taken more than 3 decades of negotiations to get to the state where this fairly weak commitment could be accepted globally, even though it falls far short of the full-blooded phasing out of fossil fuels for which many countries and most activists have been pressing. The arrival of a second Donald Trump term is unlikely to help the cause of the global climate crisis. His victory in the US presidential election cast a particularly bleak shadow over the already gloomy preparations that were made for COP29 in Azerbaijan, which is now winding down. Now, the European Commission President, as well as French President Emmanuel Macron, were also not expected to attend the summit in Azerbaijan, and there is fear that any breakthroughs hoped for at that just concluded summit will not happen. Into this new arena strides Donald Trump again, a man who described climate change as a great big hoax and is expected to repeat the decision made during his last presidency to withdraw the United States from the landmark Paris Climate Agreement. In contrast to his views, the United Nations General Secretary, on the other hand, Antonio Guterres, has been particularly outspoken in his warnings about the dangers that our planet now confronts in the run-up to COP29, talking of humanity committing collective suicide and accusing fossil fuel companies and fossil fuel producing nations of having humanity by the throat. The era of global warming has ended, he has argued, and the era of global boiling has arrived. Alarm over Earth's climate is based in part on researchers warning that the 1.5 degrees Celsius rise in global temperatures, which the climate negotiators has hoped to avoid, is unlikely to be breached over the multiple years by the end of the decade, while many other climate researchers fear that holding the heat down below a 2 degrees Celsius rise is likely to prove impossible as well. Now, what happens in such a scenario? Major tipping points are likely to be passed. This will include the destabilization of Greenland, as well as the West Antarctic ice sheets, the abrupt thawing of the world's permafrost regions, the collapse of the North Atlantic Ocean circulation system, and the massive die-offs of tropical coral reefs in places like the Caribbean and the South Pacific. Widespread flooding, as we witnessed in Grenada last week, will ensue, and temperatures will continue to rise, while deadly droughts, as we witnessed in Grenada this year, and storms, as we witnessed in Grenada this year as well, will increase in frequency. Hundreds of millions of people, mostly those in developing nations like Grenada, will find that their homelands may no longer be habitable in this era of global boiling. Folks, this is the Bubb Report. We will be right back with the first segment of the program. If you're joining us on YouTube, please remember to subscribe to our live stream. And if you're over on Facebook, please remember to share this week's live stream as well. Please stand by for the first segment of the Bubb Report.
Listeners, I see Michael already smiling. He anticipates what I will say. My good friend.
And I put my head on a block and I offer Mr. Brother Bishop the scalpel to cut it off.
The political leader has said several times up to last night that is not a reflection of her personal views or the views of the party. And you understand, George, how elections at the party level work.
So, Dr. Pei, do you have ties? Do you have ties to the National Democratic Congress, Dr. Pei? Or rather, were you commissioned by the NDC to do this poll?
Information because it seems interesting that a lot of your advice is very consistent with what was said. Brilliant.
And good luck with everything.
You too, man. May the best candidate win in the town of St. George.
But kill on.
Yes.
You is a tongue man too, so stop at that. Tell everybody you are a tongue man too.
We are a people who have always aspired for more. We've always aspired to do better. We've always accepted that not because your mother didn't go to secondary school, you should go. It has always been the other way around. You should aspire.
You've been there for a long time. Want to be queen of St. Andrews, but yet the problems around you you're not seeing. You can pray yourself out of the problems in St. Andrews.
Some persons were getting pension after 2 terms in office, right? And the persons that work for 26 years plus not getting anything. It's just unfair.
God is good and God looks after me. You know, not just my wife is no longer here, so both herself and the father up there are looking after me very, very well indeed.
Not a few people that you pick up by the side of the road to run in an election. These are not people that you mustered up and you pulled together a few months before you think an election is going to call and you say we want to win an election, so let's come together.
Viewers and listeners, welcome back to this week's edition of the Bubb Report. Now, we will be examining the legal and administrative implications of government's thrust to statutorize health and hospital services in Grenada. 3 weeks ago on the Bubb Report, Health Minister Philip Telesford announced to the national community government's intention to proceed with statutorization as of the 1st of January 2025, though the Prime Minister, on a subsequent appearance on this program, said the process will begin in January, presenting 2 conflicting timelines. However, hospital statutorization will entail several moving parts, including a review of the current Grenada Hospitals Authority Act, the appointments of a board of directors and CEO to treat with its new designation, the setting up of a fee structure to generate revenue. Of course, missing from the conversation on statutorization is the issue of implementing national health insurance, which will be able to fund the service, as well as to assist those who can't afford to pay for hospital services. We are now joined for this first segment by Mr. Terran Gilchrist, who is a hospital administrator, as well as Ruggles Ferguson, constitutional attorney. Gentlemen, welcome to this week's edition of the Bubb Report. It's good to have you. Ruggles, you've been here before, but I believe it's the first time that we have Mr. Gilchrist on the program. So, Mr. Gilchrist, welcome to the Bubb Report, sir.
Yeah, welcome. This is my first time.
Yes, Mr. Gilchrist. I was saying to you backstage, sir, that I never knew your brother had a twin, but you're telling me here that Cullen is your older brother. So it's good to have Cullen's younger brother here and not his twin.
Yes. Thank you, Kelon, and good morning to all listeners and viewers. Mm-hmm.
Yes, Ruggles. It's a pleasure having you here again, sir. It's always a pleasure having you, sir, because what you do a lot of pro bono work in public spaces. I call it pro bono because you dole out legal advice in a way that's beneficial to the national community. So thank you for your service, sir.
Yes, you are most welcome.
Absolutely. And so, Mr. Gilchrist, I want to begin with you, sir. Talk about your background and work with the General Hospital in Grenada in the early 2000s.
Yes.
For those who may not know.
Yeah, I think most people know me. I was a former director of hospital services in Grenada. In fact, I worked in the health sector in Grenada for about 18 years, in labs and also hospital administration and also planning. Then I migrated to Trinidad and Tobago, worked with the Health Authority in Northwest and Eastern Regional Health Authority. Then went over to Montserrat as the director of hospital services and technical advisor for the construction of the new hospital. Then I moved over to Turks and Caicos Islands. I was the director of health policy and planning, then back into Trinidad, which I have since retired. But while in Grenada, most people know me as the policy advisor to the NDC government, and also a trade unionist, because I spent 8 years on the executive of the Public Workers Union during the time in which the policy for decentralizing hospital was on the table. So I'm very much aware of what took place. I also did extensive research on why the statutorization failed in 1998.
So you did some research on why the statutorization failed, and of course we will be getting to that conversation in short order because you have so much institutional knowledge on this issue, and I think sometimes that is what is missing. But can you talk big picture, Mr. Gilchrist, in respect of, and not only Grenada, but in the Caribbean in general, what are some of the structural deficiencies in the makeup of our hospital services that cause our hospital services to function as inefficiently as they do, especially against the backdrop of the fact that international organizations such as PAHO, the WHO, speak of how well designed our health and hospital services are?
Well, let me preface by saying that the issue of reform, health sector reform, picked up speed in the Caribbean in the 1990s in a number of countries, and those reforms were supported by PAHO and international organizations. The attempt is to improve the quality of public services, and health is one of those services. The efforts to improve that. Health services in the Caribbean, as you know, the leading cause of death is non-communicable diseases. The cost of medical technology continue to rise, the issue of globalization, and a number of factors have impacted our health system during the 90s. Government intent in the Caribbean, most of the Caribbean islands started a reform, which is organizational change, to bring greater decision-making at the hospital level, greater efficiency, involve the private sector in improving efficiency in the management of hospital services. It must be noted that hospitals consume approximately 70 to 80% of the budgetary allocation to health. It is the most expensive component of the health system. And of that 70%, 80% of that goes to salaries and etc. So they're faced with a lot of problems with respect to how do you reform and bring greater benefits. And in particular, the issue of involving private sector management initiative was a matter that was taken up by PAHO, WHO. So there's nothing new. In the 90s, all countries in the Caribbean attempted to move towards bringing greater autonomy, efficiency, and accountability for the management for the very important component of the healthcare system. Hospitals are considered to be the cathedral of the healthcare system. Wrong or right? The cathedral. It is where government can win an election and lose an election on hospitals. It is where most of us will end up at some point in time. It is not a solution to the health system. The solution is to build a primary healthcare-based health system. However, this is what we inherited, a hospital-based healthcare system which governments are trying its best to bring efficiencies and bring greater accountability to greater improvement, better improvement in services to the population.
Now, you speak of this hospital-based healthcare system. Let us talk about the primary healthcare system. Should we not have instead a more decentralized healthcare system that deals with the issues at the primary level before it gets to the hospital? Because what tends to happen is it gets to the hospital And, everyone then wants to throw blame on the doctors and the nurses without ascribing blame to themselves in many respects. Because perhaps if you were engaging in proper preventative care, then you would not end up in the hospital in the first place. The hospital should only be that place of last resort.
No, I agree. But the data, the economics, the data say that hospital is where most of your medical equipment, high-end medical equipment exists. Most of your specialist doctors, the highly specialized departments are in a hospital. The primary health care, which is the most important component of the healthcare system. If you look at the funding, you will see majority of the funding goes to hospitals simply because they have the specialists, they have the equipment, etc. So I agree. The PAHO have recommended that government should have a paradigm shift in the allocation of resources, but at the same time, we want to ensure that there is efficiency, greater efficiency in the secondary healthcare system so that more resources can go out towards the primary care. But you can't change it. This is where all your daughters and sons will want to be a gynecologist, a specialist, a surgeon, and use the CT scan, etc. Hospitals are the cathedral. This is the headquarters of the healthcare system. It should not be, because it's very expensive. No government can put all the efforts and emphasis on hospitals. This is where people go when they're sick, right? Just to keeping the population healthy, focusing on health promotion and prevention. But that's the fact. In the 90s, hospitals consumed most of the money in the Ministry of Health in Grenada, spending Grenada spent approximately $36 million per annum on in the healthcare system, and I'm telling you, 60 to 70% of that goes towards hospital services, salaries, and hospital services. Hence the need for the need for the need to reform hospital operations for greater efficiency and accountability.
Absolutely. Let me bring in Ruggles here, and Mr. Gilchrist, we'll be getting back to you shortly to unpeel the layers of the onion in respect of not to unpeel it, but to peel it really in respect of why that attempt at reform failed during your tenure with the hospital and respect of the work that you did. But Ruggles, the reason why I brought you in here, because statutorization is not just a simple legislative prescription that you just go in Parliament and say, okay, we have hospital statutorization today, and therefore everything in respect of tenure of security of tenure for workers remains the same. The employment designation remains the same. The way that the hospital functions remains the same. So the reason why I brought you in here is to speak about the legal implications of statutorization specific to the employment and contractual designation of the employees who work at the hospital or in the health system. In other words, the Act speaks to secondment, because we do have a hospital Act, and that speaks to secondment. What is secondment, and what would that mean for the workers there?
Okay, thank you again, Kellon, and let me say a special good morning to Mr. Gilchrist. I understand why he can't be found in these parts. He's hopping all over the Caribbean, providing service at the hospital level. Congratulations.
He's a high commodity Grenadian export.
Well, I realize that. I realize that. Of course, this legislation, as you would see, is actually was passed. The law was passed since 1998. It's Act 4 of 1998. That is 26 years ago. And at the time, the Act was supposed to come into effect, as the Act states on the face of it, was supposed to come into effect in March 1998. So that's quite a long time ago. But we are dealing here with a transition from one structure to another. Currently, the hospital and its employees, they fall under the Ministry of Health, and they fall under the public service, and of course, the constitutionally mandated structure to deal with public service employees is the Public Service Commission. So you have, by virtue of Section 83 of the Constitution, 83 and 84, the relevant sections governing the employees in the public service, the appointment of those employees, the disciplining of those employees, the firing of these employees. But what you have now under the legislation, and Parliament has the power to pass laws for the peace, order, and good government of the country. So says Section 38 of the Constitution. So the Parliament, pursuant to that power to pass laws as provided by the Constitution, passed the Grenada Hospitals Authority Act back in 1998. And what that did now is to set up a different kind of structure. So under that structure now, you have a board of directors responsible ultimately for policy and for the hiring and firing of employees. So you actually have a new structure. The appointment of that board is by the Minister of Health. So the minister maintains authority to appoint members of the board, and members of the board would serve for a 3-year term. So obviously, and I've been advised that the idea is in 2025, January 2025, to move to that particular structure, which will have the implications, some of the implications you outlined. And of course, what would be of greatest concern to the employees, I take it, and to their respective unions would be the benefits, whether or not under that new structure, the existing employees in the public service would lose any benefits, would their benefits be preserved, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of such a structure. Now, the structure itself, as the Act indicates, is to promote efficiency and economy. Efficiency and economy, effectiveness, to ensure that you maximize the provision of services and you have the designated experts to run the show. So there are certain advantages of creating a statutory body. Now, under the current structure, you have, and you asked the question about secondment. So secondment means, in effect, that persons who are employed currently in the hospital, in the general hospital, as part of the Ministry of Health, appointed by the Public Service Commission, they will be assigned to this new authority, because this is a statutory authority. It's created by Parliament. So it's a separate legal entity on its own. It's a new legal entity. And therefore, the secondment means that you, the public worker, are subject to public service rules and regulations, and working under the auspices of the Ministry of Health through the PS and the other relevant structures, they will move over. It doesn't mean that you're going to a physically different place, or that you are performing different services. But the structure has changed, and you're moving now to this, you're falling under this new structure, So it might be for 2 years, for 3 years, for 5 years, or it might be permanently. So the first question that the employees and of course the union would want to know, would these employees lose their benefits? And I think section 28 provides for the body that is created under the Constitution, the Public Service Commission, to approve secondment. to this new entity, the Hospitals Authority. And the Public Service Commission, subject to whatever conditions they impose, will can second or in a sense transfer for a period of time a public service servant to work under this particular new entity. However, and let me point out here, Kellon, that this issue of statutorization and the Constitution has arisen before. And in fact, 2004, you had the Grenada Postal Corporation, which fell under the Ministry of Communications and Works. And then you had a similar structure as the Grenada Hospitals Authority being created. I think that one was the Grenada Postal Authority. And the issue of the workers falling under the Ministry of Communications and Works and the Public Service Commission having to move over now to this new Grenada Postal Authority. And it was challenged at the time by TAU and the Public Service Commission, not TAU, and the Public Workers Union, sorry. A claim, a constitutional claim, was brought by both TAU and the Public Workers Union against the Public Service Commission, the Attorney General, and the Grenada Postal Authority. And maybe if I probably just try to simplify what the matter was about before the court. The issue was whether or not, with this new entity created, whether or not the effect of it was to abolish the positions of the public workers, the public service employees, for this new entity. And the reason why that question is an important question, because there's a section of our Constitution, 84.8 of our Constitution, that many heard of over the past few years. And what 84.8 says, if an officer, that's a public officer, is required to retire because of the abolition of his position or the reorganization of his department, then that officer, he or she, should receive retiring benefits as if he had attained the age of 60 years. So it is a constitutionally entrenched right for public workers, public employees, that if they are being retired for the purpose of abolition of their posts or reorganization of their department, then they get retiring benefits, not on the basis of their years of service, but as if they had worked up to their retiring age, which is 60 years. So that was an issue. Is this an abolition of the post that was under the Grenada Postal Corporation? And if this is an abolition of the post, does that mean that 84.8 of the Constitution will be triggered for these employees, meaning that they will get pension and retiring benefits as if they had attained the age of 60 years? And that case emerged from retrenchment back in the late 1980s, and you had that case Donovan and the Attorney General, which established that principle. So that was
Ruggles, yes. To stick a pin on that case. Would that have any impact then? Meaning, in terms of what the court ruled, what was the conclusion of that challenge at the level of the courts?
Right. Importantly, the court, both at first instance, and it was Justice Barrow who ruled. Then Justice Barrow, he ruled. Yes, and not just he ruled, but there was a consent position based on the judgment that there was indeed an abolition of the posts, However, he ruled that 84.8 was not triggered in those circumstances. And why? Because, as the court ruled then, and the Court of Appeal agreed, that the employee was not required to retire. So to trigger the section and to trigger the pension and retiring benefits under Section 84.8, a precondition is that the employee must be required to retire. And in that case, he ruled, no, the employee was not required to retire because the employee was being placed in a new position or an equivalent position under this new entity. And under the Postal Corporation Act, the pension rights of these employees were preserved. So the rights and benefits, notwithstanding, and that's the critical issue, notwithstanding the transfer to this new entity, the pension rights and benefits continued or were preserved. In other words, they were treated as though the employment in the public service was continuing, even though they fell now under the jurisdiction or control or authority of a new entity. In that case, the Grenada Postal Authority, and in this case would be the Grenada Hospitals Authority. So that was the ruling of that case. And the second issue, just to quickly, because I'm sure we'll come back to it, but just to plant it in the minds of listeners and viewers, the second issue is in that case was, does the Public Service Commission, which is constitutionally mandated and authorized to appoint, discipline, dismiss, as the case may be, public servants, does the Public Service Commission have the authority to transfer a public worker outside of the four corners of the public service? Because technically, you have a new entity being created, which is a statutory authority. So that was an issue that the court had to decide. And in that case, the court held that yes, the Public Service Commission had the authority to transfer outside the public service. However, and there's a critical element there that needs to be understood. Whereas if you're transferring within the public service, you do not require the consent of the employee. However, if you are transferring outside of the four corners of the public service, you require the consent of the employee. I think that was the distinction made there. So I don't know if you want me to pause here.
Yes. So I would want you to pause here, and then we are going to get to Mr. Gilchrist. Mr. Gilchrist, I'm sure you've been listening intently to what Mr. Ferguson.
Much interested, because I was centered to this issue. I think those very interesting, very interesting. And the only comment I want to make based on my research is that I want to say what Roberts mentioned, because as a result of this, when I interviewed persons involved in the Health Sector Reform Committee, which was charged to implement the policy, and I interviewed the union representative. There were comments like, based on our legal advice, the public service cannot second public officer to statutory authority, quote unquote. As Laura Clarkson, may also rest in peace. We were aware that the government did not have the money to pay off workers, but we had to uphold our position against secondment, because secondment is illegal and will not benefit the workers. Another comment is that the Constitution is clear. They are reorganizing the hospital services, and therefore workers will have to be compensated. Now, those were some of the opinions circulating at the time when this process was on. Remember, that was peddled by the union. Even though the union was part of the health sector reform committee set up by the cabinet, right? At the point of implementation, there is where everything collapsed. The point that Rogers mentioned, that workers have to indicate the willingness to go over. Now, could you imagine the prevailing mistrust and chaos happening in Grenada in the health system around that time? So that a lot of confusion taking place during those periods. But I want to make a point, Rogers. Let me tell you about the Trinidad scenario, because it's important for me to mention that. I was Chief Executive Officer of the Northwest Regional Authority. In the Trinidadian scenario, secondment was included in the act. The union was against secondment. So the government now introduced what is considered to be VSEP, which is Voluntary Separation Package, for those persons who want to go over to the authority. So you accept your package and the authority may employ you. But those persons who did not want to go over continue to work in the authority, but they were under the Ministry of Health. And over time, they were phased out. In the case of Grenada, there are workers that are in the civil service and there are workers that are under 340. My understanding is that a lot of contract workers there, right? Those are not under the public service rules and regulations. They are 340, right? So in the scenario in Trinidad, you could have a situation where the authority is established, and there are workers that are in the public service, but they're working with the authority, and there are workers working directly with the authority, and the authority has its pension plan, etc. Interestingly, it was beneficial for persons to move over in Trinidad, VSEP, and move over, because when you retire, you get your pension from the government and you get your pension from the authority, because the authority established a pension scheme for those workers that are permanently employed with the authority. So there's a way around this matter. If workers do not want to accept or indicate they wish to transfer, but they wish to remain, they can remain with the statutory authority, but they will have to follow under the management system that is there. And in case of a surgeon, his concern is about the patient, etc., etc. Right? I'm just indicating.
Ruggles, yes, but Ruggles, you mentioned something there here about if the worker agrees.
Yes.
That may be. I am anticipating that may become a sticking point here.
Yes.
And so, Ruggles, my question to you as an attorney is based on what happened in the 90s with Laureate Clarkson, and based on the Postal Corporation matter here. Of course, my grandmother was part of that process of statutorization. That's why I know all about secondment and all of that. May her soul rest in peace. But what happens if the worker says, look, I don't agree. I don't agree with whatever the separation package is, or whatever the new terms and conditions of my employment would be? What happens in such a situation?
Right. First of all, let me just ask, are you hearing me clearly?
Yes,
I think a call came in and affected the quality, for example, of my hearing, but are you hearing me clearly?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay, yes. Well, in those circumstances, what can happen is that the Public Service Commission can transfer internally that employee to another department of the public service, one, or two, you can retire that person. It depends, I suppose, on how much service that person has given up to that particular point in time. So if you are transferring, because that was an issue that arose in that particular case, internally, then it's not an issue. But once you are, because part of the argument then is that you can't transfer outside of the public service. The court held in that case, yes, you can transfer outside. However, you need that consent. So if you don't get that consent, then the option is the question would be, should that employee be transferred to another section of the public service, or should that employee be retired under the provisions of Section 84(8) of the Constitution?
But
I think what that case is, because there are several cases and it might require different programs to deal with it. But we have a line of 84(8) cases in Grenada, starting with Donovan in the early 1990s. That was following the retrenchment, the big retrenchment program of the government in 1987. And what they did is to set up the Grenada Reorganization of the Public Service Act, well, commonly referred to as the Retrenchment Act. And they said in that Retrenchment Act, in fact, which was described as a golden handshake then, it basically said, listen, based on your years that you worked in the public service, you will get a pension based on those years. And the essence of the challenge, the constitutional challenge was, listen, under 84(8), if you are retrenching an employee, you have to pay that employee not based on his or her years of service, but as though that employee had reached the retirement age, which is 60 years. So if that occurs in this instance and the employee is being retrenched, in my respectful view, then it will require retirement pursuant to that section. The alternative is an internal transfer.
Mr. Gilchrist. Yes, Mr. Gilchrist.
Let me advise. There was a point in time just before the board want to take up this position. We give workers the choice. Workers had a choice. Do you want to remain? Do you want to transfer? And that was in total chaos because it was not planned properly. What I'm trying to say here is that you're talking about a hospital, and there are no other hospitals in Grenada. So the issue of whether or not a physician says, I don't want to be seconded, I want to remain within the public service, right? The argument, what are you going to do? Send him to the primary care to do surgery? Come on. You create, I am prescribing an experience in the Trinidad scenario, which we went on a bad road by saying, if you don't want to work, we move you out and all kind of madness. That created chaos. There are some category of workers, a secretary or something, but the workers we are talking about, nurses, medical lab technologists, pharmacists, were in the public service, apart from a health center which has nobody else except nurse, right? We're going to transfer them too. So that created a lot of chaos. I am prescribing to the government that, look, it happened in Trinidad. The process, organizational change does not happen immediately. I managed a Northwest Regional Authority. There were workers working with the authority, and there were workers under the Ministry of Health. They're under the Ministry of Health. Yes? There are workers also who took VSEP, voluntary separation. You decide to separate, the government gives you a package. And the employer, the statutory authority, may decide to employ you once they meet the qualification. As the CEO, I have workers who, but they perform their duties, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in fact, over time, they decide to come over because they watch on the fence and they're watching to see how the authority operates in terms of the packages that they have. And the authority was able to give some additional benefits for some category of workers in negotiation. So I am trying to look between the experience in Grenada and what we have learned in
Trinidad, the lessons from Trinidad.
Yeah, but brothers, at that time, you see all that you talk about, it was total chaos. Because the union was saying one thing, the also executive in the Ministry of Health did not support it. So the committee did not have a good communication strategy. They did not have a plan to roll this thing out. So I'm saying it is important to understand this is an organizational change. This is a transformational agenda which requires a lot of effort in developing a communication strategy in terms of managing resistance and providing information to people. But it can work, and I'm strongly supporting the need to reform the management. Let me say, the Health Sector Reform Committee had a power consultant on it, Dr. Nichols, and his study found what was the problem of the health system during the time. He said there were massive centralization of decision making and incompetency in the management of the hospital. That's what he found. People were not equipped to manage. And that is why the need to bring in private sector initiatives, right? Because the qualifications will change for the director, etc., etc. You catch, and persons will be held accountable for it. But in the public service, you know what happens.
Yeah.
If you need,
except Mr. Gilchrist, Mr. Lane here is saying that except in the Trinidad Constitution does not have the equivalent of Section 84.8.
Yeah, I know, but the union did not support secondment. The union did not support
the unions in Trinidad at the time
did not support secondment.
Yes,
as Lord Clarkson didn't do in the 90s, early 2000s.
But she agreed when implementation she turned.
Yes. If I may, and I understand the point, and the point being made about improving efficiency, because that's an economy. In fact, the Act states that on the face of it. But we have to be careful when making comparisons, because the Trinidad and Tobago Constitution is different. In fact, Grenada's Constitution has very unique features in it, including the protection of pension benefits that many other constitutions do not have. There is no equivalent, to the best of my knowledge, of an 84.8 in our constitution, even in the other OECS territories. That section 84.8 was placed there because of the peculiar circumstances leading to Grenada's independence in 1974. And a safeguard to ensure that there were no mass dismissals within the public service at the time of independence. So it was put there as a protective measure. So as we all know from our experiences with referenda in Grenada, Trinidad, for example, to change its constitution does not require a referenda. It requires a special majority in parliament. So the laws are slightly different, but I think one of the important features, because as the saying goes, knowledge is power. And when you are making these transitions, there'll be all kinds of different viewpoints. And the viewpoints, of course, they are all subject ultimately to the pronouncements of the courts, because it is the judiciary that ultimately interprets constitutional provisions and say what they mean. We could have our own very strong personal viewpoints on it, but ultimately it goes to court. And I just note that from the, in fact, you have sections 28 to 32, focusing on the preservation of the status of public officer. Even though that public officer moves over, the benefits continue under his new dispensation. The benefits continue. As Teron indicated, though, the Act makes provision for that. For example, pension plan and medical insurance, that there are certain very specific provisions, because everybody would not be coming from the public service. I expect in the initial stages, and that's where the challenge lay, in the initial stages, as you are transiting to this new legal formation, then you will have the majority of workers, more likely than not, coming from your existing public service. And as I said, the unions specifically, and it was the advice then, and in fact, those were the arguments, well, taken to court in a parallel matter, not under this matter. I'm not aware of challenges to this legislation and decisions of our constitutional court. But you can use the Grenada Postal Authority Act as the judgment, and that's a 2004 February 2004 judgment, as a parallel, and strengthen the law to suit. Because what the unions would be concerned about, what the employees would be concerned about, and of course justifiably so, is that in transiting to that new formation, they do not lose their pension and retiring benefits. I think that would be a key issue. And as the court noted in that 2004 judgment, the Postal Authority case, the unions were actively involved in the process. And I believe that a lot of problems, a lot of issues, a lot of contention can be removed once you have the involvement of the stakeholders in the process. It is as important as how you do what you do. Apart from what you do, and however great might be your intentions, laudable might be your intentions, one has to recognize that there are other stakeholders involved who would have genuine concerns. Those concerns may or may not be justifiable, but the fact is the participation in a genuine way in those discussions can lead to a different approach and outcome, and the speed with which you can achieve that transition. And there will be differences, but that's where the court comes in. If there are differences in interpretation as to what should or should not be done, then one can take it to the court, and whatever interpretation the court gives, that is the final interpretation.
And
but yes. Sorry.
Go ahead. Finish your train of thought, and then we
So I was just saying that the for example, Section 32 of the Grenada Hospitals Authority Act says under the general rubric of pension plan and medical insurance, it says 32.1, subject to the National Insurance Act, Cap 105, the authority may, with the approval of and subject to the general policy directions by the minister, provide for the establishment and maintenance of a pension plan and medical insurance for the benefits of its officers and staff. And 32.2 says, without prejudice to the generality of subsection 1, the pension plan may empower the authority to 1, pay gratuities, pensions, or superannuation allowances to, or the funds for the benefit of its officers and staff, and established contributory and superannuation funds for the benefit of its officers and staff. And 3, or C, enter into and carry into effect agreements with any general insurance company with respect to its pension scheme. No, there were bad experiences in the Caribbean with the third one, but those are allowed. But remember, the pension of public officers, especially the existing officers within the system, those pensions are protected by the Constitution. So if you are a current employee, and that's pursuant to Section 92 of the Constitution, if you are a current employee within the public service, then you are entitled, that's how we generally refer to it, as a 1958 pension. Now, during that period, once you enter the public service, you are entitled to that protection. If it has to change, it can change, but it has to be more favorable. It can't be less favorable. So the Constitution says, listen, you could have a different pension scheme. No problem. But it cannot be disadvantageous to the public officer during the currency of his or her employment. So in other words, you have all of these factors that need to be taken into consideration. and to ensure that your act itself takes care of those concerns and issues, because we can never forget the importance of the Constitution and where the Constitution stands in all of this. It is a Constitution that gives Parliament the power to make laws for the peace, order, and good government of the country. So Parliament can pass a law which says we can make the hospital a statutory authority. They have the power to do that under the Constitution. However, the same Constitution at Section 106 says that the Constitution is supreme. And when you're making a law, as you have the power to make under Section 38 of the Constitution, that law must not be inconsistent with the Constitution, because if it is, then the court can strike it down, that law that you make, as being null and void and of no effect to the extent of that inconsistency. So I make that point in relation to the employees and their benefits under the public service. If you're coming from a different department, that does not apply. It would not apply. We're dealing here with the bulk of the employees when this new system starts. Because if it starts in January, or if it is you intend to make it effective from January, we are in November now. There are all of these issues to sort out and to ensure that there is a smooth transition, and to satisfy the stakeholders that the Act itself makes provisions that adequately protect the continuing benefits of the employees.
Yes, Ruggles, I want you to stick a pin here, because we have to get to, and a lot of what you're speaking here speaks to those constitutionally guaranteed positions in the public service. Now, we have not even gotten to those on the Vote 340, which is, I think, one of the bigger elephants in the room. But I'll get back to you to speak to Vote 340 and those contract for service employees in the hospital who are hired by Grenada and other external agencies and things like that. So stick up in there, Ruggles. We'll get back to have that conversation. And then, of course, Mr. Gilchrist, I want to bring you in here because what we want to now talk about is why attempts at reform during your tenure of service failed to occur when there was, in fact, a blueprint for statutorization in respect of the Grenada Hospitals Authority Act. So can you just take us back, if you will, to that time and what you attempted to do and why it failed?
Yeah, I just want to be briefed. The research indicated to find out why, and it's centered around the impasse over all some of the things that we talk about. An impasse between the Public Workers Union and also the government over this issue about transfer and seconding. That was the crux of the matter. That was the contentious issue. There were also matter of the reform, the team, the issue, the lack of a communication strategy, because this is a organizational change, and people will resist the change, and there was no structure set up to manage the resistance and the change and the confusion that is taking place. One of the things that there are also persons within the Ministry of Health who did not support statutorization as a solution for the hospital. There were various views that those changes, those problems which was identified, could have been dealt with incrementally, right? There were also the fear of the minister appointing the board and the issue of a non-partisan board, etc. Because what happened is that the reform team had mass consultation across the country and gathered the views on statutorization. And there were concerns, so a lot of concerns. The most of the crux of this issue was a constitutional matter. was the matter concerning secondment, which Ruggles attempting to articulate. One of the things that we found also is the subset of leadership. Leadership. Who is leading this issue of the introduction of statutory authority? Is it the permanent secretary? We find that politicians taking the lead to speaking to workers, and there's a lot of suspicion on the part of workers with respect to political parties. Some of the persons on the committee indicated they should have used maybe a doctor, a nurse, right, to be part of the strategy to communicate to the workers with respect to the benefits. So most of it is centered around the soft issues. But what was noticed, there was an absence of a plan, a implementation plan to follow, and there was no evidence of the cabinet at the time asking the committee for a status update. In fact, over the period, the research said there was only one report was submitted by the committee. So there were a lot of issues in mind, but the main issue I want to say is centered around this impasse, and mainly concerning the communication and the lack of engagement among the staff.
What specific time period were we talking about?
Okay.
And when did you come in? Yes.
The proposal came in 1996. The proposal in 1996, right? There was the proposal to statutorize. And in 1998,
you had the Hospitals Authority Act being passed.
Yeah, yes. Passed. And 1 year afterwards, there was an impasse to the movement of the staff to the authority.
Right. So from 1996 to about 1998 is what that reform
2 years
process, that attempt at reform. But following that, there was no follow-up there at all.
Following 1998?
Yes.
Yeah, what happened in 1998, going forward, the government employed a director of hospital services from Outer Tobago, Dexter James. He came in, and the government inability to deal with the staffing issue, they went for financial delegation. So the Ministry of Finance delegate the responsibility for the management of goods and services to the director of hospital services. Money was placed in an account, and there were signatures to the check. We used to write check rather than bypass. We used to bypass the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Finance for purchasing urgent equipment, supplies, repairing, doing, etc. So during those periods, we had goods and services was delegated to the director of hospital services, and the staff remain under the public service. So that is what came after 1998. And
that's it. And that's it.
And then we still have but there's no delegation at this point. Everything go back to the public service. So if you want to buy a little part for equipment, you have to go to the ministry, and then you have to go to the Ministry of Finance, and they tell you they have no staff. They have no money. If you want to recruit a staff, you have to go to the ministry, and then you have to go to the Public Service Commission, and they have to delay while patients are suffering. So there is a need. Right.
Yeah. Now let us quickly talk about the whole Vote 340, and this is where I want to bring back Ruggles, because a lot of the employees might actually fall under this whole Vote 340. Ruggles, of course, we know the constitutionality of the Vote 340. That has come up several times. And I suspect that current employees with the hospital may fall under that as well. So what happens to those employees in a situation such as statutorization?
Well, let me just make clear here that not every public officer is entitled to pension and retirement benefits pursuant to the current 1958 law.
Pension Act, yeah.
Right, because you have different categories of employee. You have the established staff, you have the non-established staff. So it's really, you are speaking about the established staff, those public officers who are ultimately entitled. So those who are not entitled, and let me just put them broadly, those who are not entitled to those pension and retirement benefits of which I refer, would not necessarily be affected. There are certain legal issues that arise in any event with respect to them. For example, consenting to move over to the new establishment. But the big issue in terms of pension, in terms of retiring and benefits associated with that, may not necessarily arise with them, because in fact, there are a number of matters currently before the court, constitutional matters currently before the court, with respect to employees who are within the Public Service Commission, who are within the public service, who are under contract, and who are contracted for 2 years and the contracts being renewed. And the question is whether or not these persons fall. And we had the Bihari case recently that is now under appeal, where you have a public officer, somebody working in public service for more than 10 years, subject to a contract, that contract being repeated. And ultimately, in that case, the court ruled, because the person was not appointed by the Public Service Commission, did not have a letter of appointment from the Public Service Commission, I'm just dealing with the essence of the ruling, then they are not entitled to the protections that we asked for and the declarations that we asked for. That case is under appeal. But I'm just making that point to say that there are a lot of issues arising in the public service now with respect to who is established staff, who is non-established, who is entitled to pensions, who is not, and who can be terminated and in what manner. So you have all these different categories of individuals. With the vote 340, traditional vote 340, those were individuals who could be brought in under 340 without necessarily going through the public servers, the established public service procedure. So as I said, not all of them would be similarly affected. In other words, the fact that you work with government and you are providing a public service as a government employee does not make everybody equal as far as pension and retiring benefits and security of tenure of your job are concerned. So it has to be taken on a case-by-case basis, and in a program like this, I wouldn't dare. I wouldn't dare to make generalizations because of the unique features that may distinguish one individual from another, one group
because
from
everyone
another.
might have a uniquely different contract, terms of service and things like that, all different. And so,
because you had that.
So that would be the minefield that the government would be having to navigate as well.
Yes, because in fact, the court disagreed with us in that case, in the Bihari case.
The Bihari case, which you're appealing.
Right, and the court says, listen, Bihari worked in established pensionable posts within the public service, and there's no issue as to whether or not he was within the public service serving in positions that are pensionable within the establishment. The only difference is that he didn't get that letter of appointment from the Public Service Commission, but he got it from a permanent secretary in a ministry. And now Section 83 and 84 of the Constitution are very clear in its terms. Does that mean that a government can circumvent the mandates of a constitution by acting otherwise than through what is considered established procedure? Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have somebody on contract, a 2-year contract or 3-year contract, as the case may be. But when you're renewing that contract, over 10, 11, 12 years, at the end of the day, what is the effect of that, even in the private sector? Because the employment law, which applies to other employees, because the public service the public service has its own rules, but under the Employment Act for employees in the private service, for example, Section 29 of that act says, listen, even if you have a contract for a specified period of time, whether it's 2 or 3 years, but the performance of your duty under the contract, and I'm just summarizing it here, is intricately related to the permanency of or the nature of what services is provided by that entity. And your contracts are being renewed over an extended period. You are regarded, the law regards you as a permanent employee. Because there can be all kinds of reasons for putting people on contract, including avoiding unionization and all of these things. So but the law has protections for all of that. So I'm saying all this to say that, listen, the approach to the statutorization of the hospital, it has to be one which is inclusive. It involves all the critical stakeholder groups to get the views and everything of individuals, take into account the concerns and make provisions to deal with them. Because I'm sure there are many advantages that can be advanced, and Teron himself advanced some of those particular advantages in his presentation. But you know, sometimes we can have something good, really good, but the way you go about it ends up just derailing it.
But I do believe, based on what Mr. Gilchrist has been articulating, we do have that, shall we say, in social sciences, you call it the lived experience of having to deal with that attempt in the past. So perhaps here, past should be prologue. Mr. Gilchrist, would you not? Would you say that past will be prologue, and perhaps the current administration, in their attempts at moving forward with statutorization, should learn from those mistakes of the past in respect of how that was implemented?
I fully agree with that, and I was very, very happy to hear the Prime Minister came in and put some clarity to it. This is not about statutorization. Listen, it is about patient lives. This is not selling shoes or postal corporation. This is a hospital where people go in because they're very sick and they need care and to come out well. It is not something to be just beat around like that. And less disruption in the implementation process is important. But I wish to say that there's a great opportunity for the government and the board, because right now the government is moving towards a new hospital. And the board will have a part to play that when you have private sector initiatives inside there to have that dialogue. That level of intellectual capital does not exist in the Central Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Health role has to go towards standard and policy, etc. And I am begging the government that, look, less disruption is more, it is what you would tend to go for. However, it will not happen overnight. It will take time. Organizational change will take time over time. The issue of the national health insurance is an important component. The financing is important because we're talking a lot, but we don't look at the financing component. What I would like to see to happen, that there must be a plan to implement for role listing for involving the private sector, involving the non-NGOs, involving the Nurses Association, the Medical Association, and try our best to learn from what happened in the Caribbean. I have the view that it can work. It's a great opportunity for the government. Yes, because I have managed a health authority before. I've worked in health authority in the Caribbean, and I'm telling you, it is a possibility. But we have to look at the merits of those possibilities. That's my view on this.
The merits of the possibilities. Gentlemen, we quickly have to get to the next segment, but there is so much more that we need to talk about in relation to this issue. This is not a one and done program, but before we do, let us get to some viewer comments, because I believe there were some salient questions raised by some of the viewers. We have the same thing happened in 1998 and it was not implemented, and healthcare remained the same, if not worse. And today we are telling you that the PSC appointed person, you will not lose your benefit, and because the union's political agenda is looking at history repeating itself. This viewer, Ms. Joseph, is saying that perhaps history might repeat itself given how the union would respond to this, Mr. Gilchrist.
The union is part of a wider organization in the Caribbean and globally. I mean, I was PSI International, I work at PSI International. So there's a global fight against commercialization. So that has to be taken into consideration. That is why I just preface that it is important that we get less disruption. Disruption. That's what I'm saying. It will not happen immediately. But even though the union is involved, I mean, Class was sitting in the health sector reform. When she came out, she told the workers something else.
But she eventually, but Ms. Clarkson, to her credit, in history, she eventually bought into the statutorization desires. Yes,
we agree. We agree on the merits of the statutorization. What we have issues related to the process. The process is where we need to.
Yes, but of course, what I hear you saying is that I suspect Ms. Clarkson's evolution on the issue came from consultation, not so?
Well, I will take your view on that.
Well, I'm asking. I mean, I was 10 years old at the time.
Don't underestimate that organizational reform is not a political, social process. Do not take that out of your mind. There are always parties behind the scenes in the vested interest want to see things go a certain way. That must not be taken out of context. It is important. But I am telling you, we're only doing our patients, our public a disservice if we do not try to improve the quality of services that the people get at our hospital. It's a disservice, right? So that's my view on that.
Okay, very well. Gentlemen, closing comments on this segment. Mr. Gilchrist, you are such a breath of fresh air. I suspect that the Gilchrist family has some kind of intellectual gene running through its veins.
No. As Rogers indicated, it is important that this is not about the hospital, it's about our entire country. The hospital, remember, the hospital is the mecca of healthcare in this country. The government can win the election or lose the election on the hospitals, and it's done through the world. But there is a need, as the minister indicated, we can do better. The experiences in the Caribbean region, and we can sit together and move forward incrementally, small steps, but big impact. And over time, you will see the benefit. Government must consider the issue of the new hospital and the issue of the national health insurance. Those things are important to support the hospitalization, the statutorization of the hospital and improvement in services.
But shouldn't we be doing those first as opposed to moving forward with statutorization?
Not necessary. Not necessary because BVI have done that. They build new hospitals and then they realize, we need to set up a national health insurance to finance it. So it's not necessary.
I see. And of course, Mr. Toro Depredin is asking, can you give an example of a hospital that has been statutorized and is a successful model that Grenada can follow?
When you use the word, I want to use delegation because statutorization is an element of delegation of authority. The Queen Elizabeth Hospital has some measure of delegation. Anguilla set up health authority. There's some delegation. So there are in the region, Jamaica, Guyana, etc., has established health authority, not necessarily a statutory authority. But the study I did, a study at university, look at the impact of health sector reform in improving health outcomes in the Caribbean, and the research indicated that it's very too early. You take care about 20 to 30, 25 years to see the benefit. However, I'm not free to say, based on the reform in Trinidad, etc., and the assessment done, there is growing dissatisfaction there is, and the quality of care in the hospital, they said, have not changed. But we know exactly where it exists. What happened? The problem centered around financing. We are comparing Grenada with the United States. We are comparing Grenada with England. That's what we're doing. And our financing need to improve if we want to see the kind of improvement in healthcare. That is why financing is key to the success of statutorization.
And that comes from having a national health insurance, which of course there is also a blueprint for that. We have to contextualize that as well. The blueprint exists in Grenada for NHI. It's only a matter now, I suspect, of implementation. Ruggles, over to you for some closing comments.
Yes, well, thank you. And no doubt the interventions this morning and the experience of Tehran in this particular area shows that we have people with the experience and the know-how who can bring this into fruition. And again, I want to repeat, you see, it's those with the vision and those who understand the importance of that vision and the benefits of that vision must be able to sell that vision to others, to bring them on board, because you need the stakeholders on board. And therefore, do whatever is required to sell that vision, because people will have concerns. And sometimes we treat the concerns of people as not important because there is a bigger issue. As the example, the contrast was made between the postal corporation and the hospital and patients and lives. And no doubt, all these are important observations. But what I'm saying, it does not take away from the fact that it has to be done. It has to be done properly. And I'm not suggesting that it is not being done properly, because when invited on this program to look at these particular areas, I am not deeply knowledgeable of what has been happening as far as the practical steps towards transition. All I'm doing is to make the general points that, listen, if it is to be successful, there are concerns that stakeholders have, and it's important to consult and take concerns on board so you can make the system more efficient. So that's all I'm saying. And it's important that one does not dismiss whatever concerns they may be, simply on the basis that it's critical and we must do it. Because when we do it, for it to be successful, it is important to have the stakeholders supporting the efforts. But no doubt, and as a parting comment, we need to urgently improve our health services. It's a matter of urgency, and I don't think there will be debate on that particular issue. So what is really required at the end of the day, I believe in the next few weeks, there should be some education, public education and otherwise stakeholder engagement to sell the concept and to have others embrace the concept so we can get ultimately the ideal that we are working towards. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you again for appearing on the Bubb Report this week. Mr. Gilchrist, I hope to see you again, sir. Now that I know that you have that experience, that vast experience in health and health administration, we will be calling you again, sir, to appear on the Bubb Report.
Anytime.
Thank you, sir. Viewers and listeners, this is the Bubb Report. Please stand by as we get ready for the second segment of the program.
Should your loved ones pass on, they deserve to be treated with dignity. And at S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, we can provide you with that service. We can take you every step of the way during your sorrowful moments. When that need arises, call S.A. Johnson Funeral Home at 347-777-9797. That's 347-777-9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home is a Caribbean family-owned funeral home here in Brooklyn, providing funeral services, but in a dignified way. From cremation to burial to the repatriation of your loved ones, you don't have to go through the hassle as we provide exceptional service that allows you to mourn and heal peacefully. For more information, visit our website, www.sajohnsonfuneral.org. Send us an email at sajfuneral@aol.com or call 347-777-9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, because you deserve to be treated with dignity.
Hi everyone, thanks for checking out the Bubb Report's social media pages. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch our weekly live show, follow our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can catch repeat episodes on Wednesdays at 4 and 5 p.m. respectively on CRFM Radio and GBN TV in Grenada. We are also viewed on Sundays at 8 p.m. on WPG10 throughout the Caribbean. Thanks for watching.
We seek the truth.
Would you be handing your resignation to the Minister of Culture tomorrow, sir?
No, I will not.
The leader of the opposition, you have accused your government, sir, of using the Grenada Development Bank to facilitate the financing of personal loans for certain government ministers.
The other side is in no position to talk about those issues, and I will leave it there.
We discover new perspectives.
You know his leadership style, and so many are saying, why are you coming now to talk about those issues?
Now is the time to speak. You have the right to decide who will take over.
And you met with Dr. Mitchell, and perhaps you might want to confirm what that meeting was about in your response. But
Dr. Mitchell, like myself, are Grenadians.
We ask the right questions.
Why was there no report on the work done of the commission? And how is this new committee different from the commission that was initially established back in 2022? So who are these elements that are using you?
I'm disappointed in my political leader.
And why is that animating those political conversations now?
It's a very interesting question.
The Bubb Report with Dr. Kellon Bubb. Thought-provoking, truthful, unbiased, and truly original reporting.
And viewers and listeners, welcome back to this week's edition of the Bubb Report. Of course, thank you for those who are still staying with us. And of course, we can all agree that the last segment was indeed a very, very informative segment. So we thank our panelists for making sense of what hospital statutorization would mean for Grenada's development and for health outcomes in Grenada in general. Now, on Tuesday, a fast-developing weather system battered Grenada and other parts of the Eastern Caribbean, causing severe flooding and landslides, which forced the early closure of schools, state offices, and other businesses. The weather system also took the life of one Grenadian educator, originally from the sister island of Petite Martinique, but who worked in St. George's. Dead is Trinella Frank, whose body was found in her vehicle in the Woodlands area. Now, what Grenada witnessed on Tuesday and in the days leading up to Tuesday may be attributed to climate change. Increased heating leads to greater evaporation and thus surface drying, thereby increasing the intensity and duration of droughts. However, the water holding capacity of air increases by about 7% per 1 degree Celsius of warming, which leads to increased water vapor in the atmosphere. Hence, storms, whether individual thunderstorms, extratropical rain or snowstorms, or even tropical cyclones, supplied with increased moisture, produce more intense precipitation events, as what we witnessed on Tuesday. Such events are observed to be widely occurring, even where total precipitation is decreasing. It never rains, but it pours, and this increases the risk of flooding. And here to make sense of these events the flooding event that occurred on Tuesday is Dr. Terence Walters, who is the disaster coordinator at NADMA, as well as Ms. Cassia Johnson, who is a forecaster with the Meteorological Services of Grenada down there at the Maurice Bishop International Airport. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's edition of the Bubb Report.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. And Ms. Johnson, this is your first time on the program. I've heard you on other platforms, and you attempt to distill information that makes it easy for us non-physics people to understand, because based on an interview that I saw with you, I didn't even know that physics was one of the requirements to get into meteorology. So thank you for educating me on that. But Ms. Johnson, I do want to begin with you here in respect of the flooding event that occurred on Tuesday that resulted from that massive rainfall that we've been seeing. Now, talk to us about how forecasting has changed for meteorologists in this era of climate change.
Okay, well, as we know, with climate change, we are having more and more events of rainfall and so on in a lot of countries worldwide. Has a lot of flooding and so on that has not had that in previous years. We are having more intense rainfall in a lot of places, as well as droughts in other places. So in terms of forecasting these activities, we use our tools on the internet, digital tools to do our forecasts, and also our local knowledge and so of the island to make our forecasts, which is a new age thing because we're in the age of computers. Many years ago, our forecasters would have had to draw the charts themselves and analyze it. However, now we are using computer modeling, which may not always get it on point. Some models may get it, others may not get it on point. And that's what we have to use. That's what we are faced with, determining which model to lean more on, which should we go with, one model instead of the others? Should we do a midway thing? Should we, use our experience as locals to make the forecast that we send out to the public?
Now, before we discuss the flash flooding, the unprecedented flash flooding event that we saw on Tuesday, can you tell us the challenges of having to forecast major rainfall events?
Okay, well, this event was caused by the Intertropical Convergence Zone, that's the ITCZ. So that's an area near the equator where the northeast trade winds and the southeast trade winds meet. And in this area, we have a lot of cloud development, convective clouds, thunderstorm clouds. So during the hurricane season, that area moves northward. It migrates northward closer to our area, as we are about 12 degrees north of the equator. So this is what gave us all of that rainfall on Tuesday. And the ITCZ is a little bit challenging to forecast because sometimes it just appears in our area and we don't see it a lot of days before. Sometimes it's the day before or the day of that we see that we are going to be affected. Normally we have moisture advection, that's moisture coming in from the east, sometimes from the southeast, as with the flow of the winds and so on. And with the ITCZ, we had a surge in moisture, which is not new to us. We are accustomed having surges in moisture coming across in our area. But with that ITCZ, it really blew everything up for us.
Now, normally when you see that surge in moisture in relation to the ITCZ, what is the advisory protocol for the Met Office? Of course, we do know that there are regular weather updates, the morning weather update, there is the midday weather update that includes high tide advisories, for example. So, for example, I did see a high tide advisory coming out of your office, and that was, of course, physically manifested at the Carenage in respect of, the ocean, the water spilling over into the road. There, what apart from the regular updates that John Public receives from the office, do you also advise people who live in or specific flood-prone parts of Grenada, in addition to government agencies? And what does that protocol look like?
Well, when we see an event is approaching and we have it in our forecast that there is either low, medium, or high chance of flooding or landslides, we also always put in areas so prone. If you know you're in an area that always floods, like River Road, for example, you would know if you hear a flood advisory that you should be cautious. If you're living on a mountaintop, you know you may not be cautious of flooding, but maybe landslide. You know that if there has been days of rainfall previously, you are susceptible to landslides because the soil is already waterlogged, and there may be a greater chance of land slippage. So we put in the forecast in areas so prone. So you know your area that you're living in, that you're working in, you're going to school in. So you know if your area is accustomed to flooding and landslides, that you should be cautious in times of heavy downpours and intense rain conditions.
So you
also,
just, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, we would also, if we see anything that is definite for us, we would also give a call to NADMA, Dr. Walters, and they would also issue something. But for the most part, if we see something, it's always in the forecast and is sent out to our stakeholders, radio stations, media outlets, and anybody that's on our mailing list. We also do updates on Spice Weather 473 on Facebook and Instagram. That's information directly from the Met Office.
Now, in relation to Tuesday, what was there any sort of elevated advisory caution given based on what you were seeing coming in?
Well,
whether that's to the people that you speak to, the stakeholders that you spoke to.
In days prior to that, our 3-day forecast, there was an advisory for Monday, which we were seeing. Sometimes, depending on the wind flow and so on, things that you expect for Monday might come before Monday or after Monday, depending on the flow of things. And in the tropics, the atmosphere is very dynamic. Things change rapidly, and you just have to, every forecast update, we look at the different run of the models to give that updated information. So days previously, there were flood warnings in effect but low chances of flooding because our forecasters would have been seeing a bit of increased moisture in our area and rainfall. However, the night before, let's say Monday night into Tuesday.
That's Monday night, yeah.
Yes, Monday night into Tuesday. The models were not going for this great intensity of rainfall. Even the forecaster for Tuesday morning, there was a period on the models that went for some intense rainfall, but that would not have been long lasting. So there was only a low chance of flooding in effect on Tuesday morning at the 7 a.m. forecast. But what actually happened is that the period of rainfall was more intense and the duration was longer than expected. That is why we got all of this flooding. And as I said before, on Friday, I think it was Friday the 8th into Saturday morning, there was also a good period of rainfall, heavy rainfall, that would have caused some flooding in Grenville, I think it was, and we would have gotten 75.1 millimeters of rainfall on Friday night into Saturday morning. So with that, and then this event on Tuesday, the soil was already waterlogged and so on. So that's what caused the hazards from the rainfall event.
So what I hear you saying here is this was a preceding set of events that led to that. It is just not one singular. Of course, that was we saw that one singular event, but we cannot talk about it in isolation without talking about the conditions that led to that event in the first place.
Yes, so the conditions that would have been there for days prior, that would have increased the effects of what we would have gotten on Tuesday. So all of the flooding and the landslides, especially because the soil was already waterlogged. That's why we got so much land slippage.
And Dr. Walters, let me bring you in here from NADMA. First and foremost, what is the protocol that NADMA follows for non-hurricane events such as what we saw in Grenada on Tuesday? Of course, based on what Ms. Johnson just articulated here, this was a build-up type of event that led to that avalanche that we saw in many parts of the island, that significant deluge that we saw as a result. What was at what point did NADMA feel it was necessary, based on the updates that the Met Office was providing to the national community, that perhaps this might not be a good situation for life and limb, and people should perhaps take extra precaution.
All right, thank you very much. And well, so we follow the protocols from the Met Office, or the information provided to us from the Met Office. All right, and as long as the Met Office gives us some information that, hey, we have the situation on hand and we need to inform the population, we do so. Whenever there's an event like Cassie mentioned, sometimes when they see something that's definite, they would call on NADMA, they would inform us, they give us the information directly, and we send it out to the population. So if there's going to be a severe weather event that the Met Office is saying, hey, this severe weather event is going to occur Tuesday, Wednesday, all right, then they call us directly, and it's not in the regular forecast. It's now an event for NADMA to inform the population, and we do so. So the Met Office is normally giving the regular updates, the regular forecast, and whenever there is any indication that there's going to be a severe weather event, we would take the lead from there. Like Cassie said, and she mentioned earlier concerning the unexpected amount of moisture that was received. I think that is that is a part of Tuesday that we need to look at. Maybe it was very unexpected at the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, it was unexpected, but there was indeed a buildup. Were you not also looking, Dr. Walters, at the buildup that was happening in advance of Tuesday, that perhaps to make a call, for example, or advising the businesses, state offices, that they should be closed, or parts of areas that would be more flood prone should take extra precaution?
But again, we take the lead from the meteorological office, because the forecast, all right, the forecast is given by the meteorological office, and we are not able to give any other information apart from what is given by the meteorological office. So NADMA, because we cannot, all right, we cannot, if we take on our own and give information, then we would definitely be out of line. So we have to follow the information that's given by the meteorological office.
That chain of command, if you will, for want of a better word. But let us talk about increase. Of course, we are living in a period of just so much climatic uncertainties. Yes, we are seeing all of this all over in places like Spain recently. You had people who were on vacation who were trapped in their cars as well, who died, who met their deaths in the same way that the young lady in Woodlands met her death. What is has NADMA been giving thought to, especially in flood-prone areas of the country, to perhaps looking at specific protocols for those places? Disaster response protocols for those places? Or no?
Yes, it is something that we have to take into consideration. Like we say, now with climate change, the hazards are becoming more frequent, more intense. We are seeing new trends, okay? And as we go forward, we now have to put new protocols in place to adapt to the circumstances, because the kind of weather patterns that I have become accustomed to growing up, it's totally different now.
It's not the same. Yeah.
It's totally different now. There were times when it would rain all day and you would have no flooding. Now you have 3 hours of rain, and the whole country you have flooding and landslide, and so now we have to now we have to start taking into consideration climate change, its impact, its effects on our country, and in terms of how we have built our houses, how we've constructed or drains or waterways or roads. Can they now accommodate the amount of water that's going into them as compared to 10, 15, 20 years before? So we have to look at all those things. It's a developmental issue that we have to take into consideration here to ensure that we address all the circumstances that we're seeing as we go forward with climate change.
Now let us talk about flooding damage assessment. Do you, after floods occur, does NADMA send out a team to also engage in the type of damage assessment that you're expected to do after major hurricanes?
Yeah, well, again, Ministry of Infrastructure takes the lead here, and we have our district teams, okay, who would, because we have 17 districts across Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit-Martinique, and these teams will be out giving us reports as to, where they saw the significant flooding, where the landslides occurred, and if any families were impacted, what are their immediate needs and how we can address those needs, how we can assist with addressing, or probably partner with other entities to address those needs.
So in the context of flooding events, again, you take lead from the Ministry of Infrastructure, and it's not something that NADMA does.
No, the Ministry of Infrastructure, they are the ones responsible for the cleanup. Remember, the cleanup is in terms of the heavy machinery, because infrastructure is part of the NADMA structure. And again, if we well, I mean, we don't have time for that now, but if we get down into the structure of NADMA, you'd see that there are several entities that are part of the NADMA structure. You have health, you have Ministry of Infrastructure, you have education, social development, Royal Grenada Police Force. All these entities form part of the NADMA structure, and they will then take the lead on specific areas. All right. So it's not that, and sometimes when people say NADMA, they think about the head office and the 10 employees at the head office. So when they ask, where's NADMA, they're looking for the coordinator and probably one person to be there cleaning up. But again, infrastructure and all the other entities, Royal Grenada Police Force, and so they are part, or they form part of the NADMA structure, and they take lead on those things.
Because it's not only Dr. Terence Walters and folks up there, because that's usually, and again, you see, that is why public education, Dr. Walters, is important. And that's why we're doing this, because, everybody, well, we're NADMA. They're not from that. Well, first of all, NADMA, they're not the forecasters. The forecasters are the good folks, Mr. Tamer, Ms. Johnson, and so on down there at the Maurice Bishop International Airport. But yes, go ahead, sir.
And if I may add here, the Met Office, okay, is part of the NADMA structure, and a permanent part, okay, both on the management and on the general committees. So all these entities across the country form part of the NADMA structure. So whenever there's an event and you see the Ministry of Infrastructure, all right, cleaning up, and so again, that's part of the NADMA structure.
As part of the NADMA structure. Now, yes. Dr. Walters, now post Ivan, and this is something that came to my mind. Post Ivan, CEDA, that's the Canadian International Development Agency, funded an entire restructuring project for NADMA, specific to information sharing, reforming how the community districts worked. I believe it's 17 districts you mentioned. Restructuring those, as well as other disaster policy procedures. What is the legacy of that particular funding, and how much of that is in use today?
Well,
based on that restructuring.
Yeah, we have come a long way as it relates to disaster management in Grenada and how we function. And we do have the districts, the district committees, and all the national committees functioning, operating. And I think as the Prime Minister mentioned, that we're heading to statutorization sometime early next year. All right, we would see strengthening of those various entities in disaster management in Grenada. Now, we also have to understand that we need to review, revise, restructure from time to time to ensure that we figure out what is working, what is not working, our strengths or weaknesses. But I do believe that coming out of Hurricane Ivan, Hurricane Emily, and that whole restructuring that has taken place, we do have a much better structure operating now. We've had legislation passed, the Disaster Management Act passed in 2023, And that act will now guide the statutorization process. And the statutorization of NADMA will provide an opportunity for the entity to be strengthened, for the entity to be able to attract the, what should I say, the resources, attract the human resources that are necessary to manage the whole disaster management process in the country in a more efficient and effective manner. So I think we've come a long way coming out of Hurricanes Ivan and Emily and that CEDAR project that you're mentioning.
Let us get to some viewer comments. Margaret Francis is saying, so in addition to the warnings to flood-prone areas from the Met Office, are there road signs that indicate an area may be prone to flooding so that the public is aware when there are these weather events? Dr. Walters?
Oh, they're asking about road signs. Okay, so
yes,
well, we have put some signs for tsunami and evacuation routes, and so that's in Carriacou, PD Martinique, St. Patrick,
St. Patrick's, yeah,
and then some parts of St. George's. So, but that's specific to tsunami and evacuation routes, and so. But in terms of road signs for flooding, I must say we do not have those road signs as yet at this point.
But perhaps that is something you might be thinking about moving forward. So, Margaret Francis, I hope that answers your question, and an excellent suggestion there.
Yes, go ahead. If I may just add, you know, like Cassia mentioned, historic events would say to people, these areas are prone to flooding, okay? Because we know, okay, Tantine, you know, Montrouge, you know, River Road, the Wester Hall, and you know, these areas are prone to flooding. So historic events should inform.
Yeah, that's true, Dr. Walters, but I think in the context of this particular event on Tuesday, other areas were also inundated that traditionally were also not inundated in the past.
Right, and
again,
and
that's the challenge with climate change too. So
that's the point I was getting to with climate change. You know? Yes.
Yeah. All right. Someone is saying most Grenadians will see a flooded road and they will drive through it and then blame Tom, Dick, and Harry for it. Again, I don't have evidence of that, Ms. Ross, but I suspect you have evidence to that effect. But Dr. Walters, go ahead, please.
But if I may say here, I mean, that event, we had one incident with a young lady, you know, perishing in the flood.
In Woodlands,
Yes, and I want us to be very sensitive because we do not have the evidence of what exactly happened. I want us to be very sensitive because, I mean, this young lady has family and relatives and friends and so, and be very sensitive with our comments about the circumstances and about the situation, right?
Leading to that. Absolutely. Yes. This is very clear.
Condolences to the family.
Condolences to the family. May she rest in peace indeed. Additionally, we need to look at the way we dispose garbage. Most times, block drains create flash floods across the island. And sometimes lots of disasters are man-made. Let's just be real. It's not only natural disasters, but...
well, all of the disasters are man-made. Okay, the hazards can be natural or man-made, but the disasters, we are the ones because, for example, the flooding, we create the conditions, okay, for the flooding. So, so that's another topic, another discussion. But the disasters are caused by us.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the same garbage disposal point there. Right. That you know, and then we have another comment. How can infrastructure be critical for engaging the public in disaster management and climate change? And I think we have the infrastructure. What kind of public education does the Met Office do? I believe the Met Office does a lot of media outreach. So let's be real. I get a lot of information from the Met Office.
and yes, go ahead, Cassia.
We have schools visiting. Just on Monday, I visited a school to talk to them about what we do at the Met Office and the products we issue from the Met Office and so on. So we do public outreach with a lot of students and so on. And on our social media page as well, our staff interacts and sends out things educational wise. When we send out our midday forecast, we have terms and definitions there for persons to, get acquainted with some of the jargon that we would use and so on. So we try to do a lot of public outreach, but I mean, there's always room for improvement with that and for us to do more.
But I want to add,
Yes, Dr. Walters.
Every year, the Met Office engages the media, and it's always difficult to get the media houses to attend these sessions. All right. So, in defense of the Met Office, they do engage the media, and if the
Well,
media,
that I do know because I do get email correspondence and communication from Mr. Tema and so on. So that is how I know that happens.
right, very well, okay. Because if we have a greater understanding across media houses, all right, then we'll be able to provide more information to the public. So
yeah,
so I applaud
that. Especially in this era, it's even much more critical.
That's right.
Let's get to historic events may inform native-born locals, but not visitors or expats, and that's why listening to what the Met Office says is important. Let's see here. How about building zonage? Remove buildings from flood-prone areas. Flooding is typically man-made. Well, I don't think that's a question that the Met Office, that would be a big picture policy infrastructure question here. Lady and gentlemen, and of course, in respect of, and one final question here, and we'll get to closing. In respect of the rainfall total, Ms. Johnson, on Tuesday itself, your office recorded 69 millimeters of rain, according to reporting, over 6 hours.
Yes.
And that might, when I hear 69 millimeters, I'm thinking that perhaps that might be about a month of rain in a couple hours. Is that accurate to say?
Some months we would experience more or less rainfall than we did on Tuesday alone. But we need to remember that we are still in the hurricane season, and the months in the hurricane season we expect and experience higher rainfalls. That was November is the wettest month for this hurricane season thus far. For right now, we have a total of 208.7 millimeters for November. This is not our wettest November, nor is it our driest November, but we just have to keep in mind that we are still in the hurricane season, and these things can happen, and we will have more rainfall than in our dry season months during the months of the wet season.
What was the wettest month ever recorded that the Met Office has? I'm not too sure if you have that information. The historian in me is trying to...
I will just give me 1 second, and I can get back to you on that.
yes. That would be good. But Dr. Walters, while I sent Ms. Johnson to do some homework. While Mr. Johnson is doing that homework, I will get to you for some closing comments, sir.
Yes, but we continue to, as a National Disaster Management Agency, to engage the public, to encourage people to understand the hazards that impact us, how they can impact you, how they can impact your family, where you live, your community, your location. We want people to be educated, because with climate change, we can expect the hazards to become more frequent, to become more intense. From Hurricane Janet in 1955 to Ivan in 2004, it was almost 50 years. But then we had 1 year after Emily, and now we have 19 years after you have Beryl. Okay, so it's not a case where you have a 50-year or 75-year or 100-year, but they're becoming more frequent and more intense, and we have to adapt. We have to get our circumstances so that we can respond, and we can protect ourselves, protect our families, do whatever we can in our communities. And I encourage you to become a volunteer with the National Disaster Management Agency, because whenever these events occur, we need volunteers across the country, because you are the ones at the community at the time when the event is occurring, and you need to respond. You need to save a life. You need to, prevent some injury or damage or death. So we encourage you to become volunteers with the National Disaster Management Agency and the other response entities like Red Cross and St. John Ambulance and so forth. So again, we are going to be faced with these events, and we ask you to know how they can affect you and know how you can respond.
Mr. Walters, and this also just crossed my mind, sorry. The damage assessment total from Hurricane Beryl, do we have any information on what the final estimated total is yet? Or are the partners still doing that work?
Yeah,
They're now in rebuilding phase. So I'm just trying to understand why we have not received a formal report in respect of damage assessment as yet.
I know there was a preliminary report. Okay, there was a preliminary report out, but the final report, okay, has not yet been released. But when that is released, which should be soon, we would definitely make it available.
Do you know what the preliminary estimate is?
Let me not, because the figures I saw were in different areas. So let me not give you a total.
Okay, so it's not a cumulative total that you have in your head. Okay,
that I have in my head, yes.
Sorry, the journalist and me just had to ask that follow-up there.
Yes.
And Ms. Johnson, I sent you to do some homework.
Yes, I did my homework.
Yes.
So historically, our wettest months are from October to December. So it's no surprise that November is the wettest month that we've had for this hurricane season thus far. But our wettest month was October 2008, and we got a total of 404 millimeters of rainfall at the airport.
October 2000, and that's just at the airport. The caveat here is that there are other recording sites as well where you record rainfall as well. So
yes, and the location of our station here at the airport is one of the driest places in Grenada. So anytime we give a rainfall total for on the radio stations in the morning for the weather reports, that is at the Met office, and a lot of times our other stations across the island may get more rainfall than at the Met office because we are at the southern tip of the island, which is very dry. So we would have gotten 69 millimeters of rainfall for that event, but other places would have gotten more. I don't have the information to give right now, but other places would have gotten more rainfall.
Much more than that. Yeah, right. Okay. Very well. Ms. Johnson, over to you for some closing comments.
Just to backtrack on one thing that you would have asked Dr. Walters, why didn't they see the events that led up to the event on Tuesday? And as he rightfully said, they wait on directives from the Met office to say, okay, we're expecting this event on this date before they put out something. But just to reiterate that we did see some moisture coming in, and we expected some rainfall, but not the intensity and the duration. So that is why we did not have a definite flood warning out, but only a low chance of flooding.
Right, and that is what makes forecasting so challenging in this period, I suspect. Yes. Yep. Any other final comments? Go ahead.
If you go for something and it doesn't happen, then the people lose faith in you, and so on. And if you
they say, well, you canceled my plans. I had plans, the rain was supposed to come and the rain didn't come, and and for forecasting sometimes it's not a perfect science,
Yes, and as I always tell people who engage with me on a personal level, we don't forecast for what is happening over your head only, but for the entire state, Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique. So sometimes when we say a condition is likely to occur for a particular day, and it doesn't occur at your location, it doesn't mean that it didn't happen somewhere else within the state. So we're making a forecast for Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique, and not just someone who is standing at the bus terminal or standing in St. Patrick or,
or someone who might be liming down at bananas or lavolanes or umbrellas.
Yes.
But in all seriousness, this is the era of climate change. And of course, our hearts also go out to, in addition to the loss we had, the people of Carriacou and Petite Martinique still have to struggle in respect of getting, and the people in northern Grenada as well, St. Mark's and Patrick, getting roofs over their heads. So, that is another issue there that we have to contend with. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for appearing on the Bubb Report this week.
You're
welcome.
Absolutely. Viewers and listeners, this is the Bubb Report. Barring the technical issue we had earlier, we certainly want to thank all of you for tuning in to this week's edition of the program. You can catch a repeat broadcast of the Bubb Report on GBN Television at 5 p.m. on Wednesday this week. Of course, we always try to bring you quality, balanced, well-informed educational programming here. The Bubb Report will not be live next week, Sunday, as I will be away in New Orleans attending the National Communication Association Conference. So the Bubb Report will be in abeyance for 1 week, but we will be back following the break that we will take next week for more quality content from us here at the Bubb Report. Please, if you are following the program and you've not subscribed, do so over on our YouTube channel. If you're following us on Facebook, please remember to also subscribe to our Facebook page so that you can get regular updates from the Bubb Report. I am your humble host, Dr. Kellen Bubb, wishing everyone a pleasant week. Take care. Bye-bye. Hi, everyone. Thanks for checking out the Bubb Report's social media pages. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch our weekly live show, follow our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can catch repeat episodes on Wednesdays at 4 and 5 p.m. respectively on CRFM Radio and GBN TV in Grenada. We are also viewed on Sundays at 8 p.m. on WPG 10 throughout the Caribbean. Thanks for watching.